Welcome to the Retire Wealthy and Happy podcast. We created this podcast to provide financial tips and tricks to help you build up your passive income and also provide methods that you can use to protect your wealth so that you can plan a better future for yourself and your family. We're grateful to have this podcast sponsored by Monument Real Estate Capital. Monument Real Estate Capital, helping you retire 10 years early through real estate investments. On today's episode, we're excited to have Oliver Fernandez with us. A brief background about Oliver: he founded McKenzie Construction in 2008. This is a construction firm based in the Washington, D.C. area. He invests in multifamily development and value-add properties. He has several hundreds of videos on YouTube teaching people how to grow a business and increase their wealth. He's also the host of the Imperfect Entrepreneur podcast. A brief overview of what we'll cover on today's episode: we're going to talk about starting a business, we're going to talk about how to learn from mentors, and we're also going to talk about how to think about alternative investments.
Welcome to the show, Oliver.
Appreciate it. You guys, excited to be here with you.
Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and what you've done and where you've been?
Yeah, I'd love to. So my name is Oliver Fernandez, and I live here in Washington, D.C. And I remember I was just trying to talk with you guys about it, but the first time I ever met Adams, I was a mastermind event, and I was talking about my meetup that I was going to do, and I was so scared to talk in front of people. And I told him I had finally broken through that because of a story he had told, and that I had like 5 people showing up, and he's like, "Hey man, do you really want this thing to grow? And do you really want this thing to be big?" And I was like, "Yes." And then he's like, "Well, this is what you need to do." And he gave me the scripts and he told me exactly what I needed to do. And next thing you know, I show up to that meetup on that following Thursday, and there was 30 people there. And I was like, "Oh my God, Adams is correct." So I'm like this like shy introverted person, and I've always kind of been a shy introverted person. I'm like big analyzer, like love to like dig into the numbers and details. But at the same time, I want to be successful. I wanted to take care of my mom and 3 sisters. That was like always my goal growing up. As we went through so much as a kid, through childhood, and as I was graduating from high school, I was debating whether I wanted to go to the military or go to college. And my mom was like, "Oliver, please go to college. Please go to college." So I followed her direction there. And the reason why I did that is because I really wanted to understand what I needed to do to be successful in the world. And I went to school and I learned, studied engineering, and, all that stuff was great. And I learned a lot of stuff, got out, got my first job. I was like making 50 grand a year. And I was like, "Oh crap." After like get my first paycheck, I was like, "Oh, I got student loans. I got to live. I don't have any money to send back to mom." And I was like really bummed out about it. And I was like figuring out how am I going to make this thing work? How am I going to do this thing? And at the same time, I was going to, I had enrolled into some classes at Georgia State. And in those classes, they were like night classes. So the teachers that would come in and teach those classes, they were, professionals in the workplace. And then they would come in at nighttime and share some of their knowledge to the students. And I really gravitated to those classes because they started talking about opportunity and started talking about like things aren't always going to be like obvious to you, but if you do a little bit of digging and you start scratching underneath the surface, you can find some real opportunity. So I ended up getting laid off from my job that I was making 50 grand for, and it probably was, looking back, it was like the best thing that could have ever happened to me because at that time that company had given up on me. But it was like the moment that like kind of woke me up and was like, "Oh, I got to go all in on myself and start developing myself and getting better myself, sharpening my own skill sets." And it was from that point forward, that's when McKenzie Construction was started. And we started off doing like really small like projects, $2,000 projects. Now we're doing, we just signed up a couple contracts that are like $3 to $4 million. So our focus is like $1 to $5 million projects. And then we're also an investor in real estate. We buy multifamily properties, 100+ unit properties. We didn't always start there. We started in the duplexes in the single family game, but now we're doing 100+ unit properties, and we're buying them, doing our value add strategy to them. And really doubling down on the things that have worked for us.
Very cool. You mentioned a couple of things. We know you're in Washington, D.C. now, and you said send money back to mom. Where are you from?
So I was born in Boston, and my mom was originally from Washington, D.C. My dad was from Amherst, Massachusetts, and he grew up in the projects. My mom, she grew up in middle class. She had both her parents there. My dad had like a broken family. And when they got together, they were young entrepreneurs themselves. And my dad started a construction business, and he became really successful with it. And he's like one of the most successful people in his family. And he went from like being dead broke to, having millions of dollars. But at the same time, there was some mismanagement of those resources and construction business failure, and it broke up the family. So my dad stayed in Boston, and me and my mom and 3 sisters, we moved to Maine. And it was just crazy because my mom was a city girl, and all of a sudden we're in Maine. Like literally there's miles between houses, right? And it's not like that anymore. There's actually neighbors that are much closer by, but there was there was a big distances between houses when we first moved there. And it was cold winters, lots of snow. Like when power would go out, it wouldn't go out for like an hour or a half a day. It'd go out for like 2 or 3 days. So it was crazy. But all of those moments, and being in those moments with my mom right beside her, I developed this like skill set inside me that like, don't be scared of trying new things, and like always give 100% effort and just try and see what's at the other end of that other side of the decision. So yeah, I'm grateful for that time. But yeah, so my mom, we grew up in Maine, and once I went to school, I left Maine, and I was actually in Atlanta, Georgia, and I wanted to send money back home to Maine to my mom.
So I come from a construction background too. So sounds like you were a cheap employee for your dad. Is that correct?
Yeah. I was definitely a laborer. You know what I mean? Like I just, he definitely gave me a job, right? And I was making $8 an hour and sweeping up the yard at night to try to get some overtime and stuff. So it was a lot of work, but all of those little skill sets I even use to this day. And it helps separate me from like other people, like that experience and just that knowing that I'm willing to do whatever it takes is something that's like is ingrained inside of me, and it helps me be certain in the moment, even when things are uncertain, especially with construction. There's so much uncertainty. I'm very certain about what we're doing because of all of the things that I've seen along the process, because I did start at the bottom.
Absolutely. I feel I can walk into a construction site and talk the lingo with the guys and build rapport much faster because I've been on a construction site for like 20 years. I know what needs to happen. I look at some things that, some people would just have an absolute cow about. And it's like, well, this is just like day 38, this is how it's supposed to look minus this guy's supposed to be here and isn't or whatever.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So Oliver, Roger, did you have any more questions there? Should we move on?
Well, I was going to say, you mentioned that you're doing $1 to $5 million projects. Are they in DC, and is it all multifamily? Is there other types and things?
Yeah, so those projects, $1 to $5 million, they're actually spread across the country. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C., but we work from basically Pennsylvania all the way south to Florida, west to Texas, and then up to Memphis. We've also done projects in Washington State, so we will go anywhere. Primarily, these projects are for the feds, like for the Navy, the Air Force, the GSA, and we always dreamed of doing these bigger projects. Like I remember when we first were starting out, we were doing, these $2,000 or these $20,000 jobs or these $300,000 jobs as a subcontractor, and we were just getting beat up so bad. It wasn't because of like lack of workmanship. I mean, we would put our blood, sweat, tears into these things, and we were installing pipe underneath like the Florida DOT like highways, right? And we do everything we said we were going to do. We'd install the pipe. We'd hire the team members, get the equipment. We do everything we said we were going to do. And then every time it came time to getting paid, it was always like, oh, we need this release, or we need this. You guys need to do this, or you guys. It was just like so painful running a business because your employees or team members don't want to hear on Friday. They're like, hey, we need to get this sort of release, and we need to do this, and we need to do that. Like, they want to get paid. So it made it so painful running a business. And we never missed payroll or any of that stuff, but it just made it painful for the owner trying to get all that, keep all that stuff straight. So that's why at that time I made it a commitment to go after these bigger opportunities and working for the owner directly. We wanted to touch the money first. And that's where it introduced us to these opportunities with the Fed, the USDAs, the Army, and the Navy, and then the Air Force, doing projects for them. They're looking for general contractors who can come in and renovate their buildings. They want to be able to just sign a contract with you, and you take it from A to Z, and then you turn it back over to them with a renovated space. Some of the things that we specifically focus on are the mechanical renovations. So these will be massive mechanical projects. And then at the same time, they still need ceiling tiles. You need to paint the walls, do the floors, and clean the space and turn it back over. So that's what those $1 to $5 million projects look like. And, we've done really well with it. Our first goal was to do $10 million a year. And we hit that goal. And then we stayed there, and I wasn't clear on what was the next target. But now we are clear on what the next target is. And the next target is to take those 10 years of $10 million a year, now compress it to do $100 million in 1 year.
That's cool. Thanks for explaining that.
Yeah.
One with the next few questions, Ben?
Yeah. So for our listeners, the show is called Retire Wealthy and Happy. And because of that, we're talking about things that you can do to build up to your retirement. And one of those things is starting a business. Everybody in the world, in the country, has the opportunity to start a business if that's something they choose to do. And Oliver has his show that's The Imperfect Entrepreneur. So we want to talk about what it looks like to start a business. And one of the questions I want to start asking is, Oliver, what do you feel is the most important thing to focus on when somebody's trying to start a business? And obviously that's a general question, but is it the operations? Is it the mental attitude? What is the most important thing you would say?
Yeah. So when you're first starting a business, that's such an interesting question, because I literally have to go back to when I first started, right? But when I first started my business, the thing that really got me going and really started to transform things was working on my mental thought process. Because of and the reason why I say that is because in the beginning, it was just me, so I had to do both operations. I had to do sales. I had to do both of those things and juggle both of those, and the finances. So you're juggling a bunch of balls in the beginning. And the only way that you're even able to complete that successfully is by having a strong mindset. I used to, when in the beginning stages of McKinsey, when we were, borrowing money to get jobs, and it just was a mess financially. I was listening to this guy, Les Brown, and he was my mental coach at the time, and he was always talk about, it's not over until I win, and he would say, if you can look up, you can get up, and all of those things I used to repeat to myself day in and day out while I was in front of my computer or making the phone calls. And fumbling and dumbling and through this thing, I didn't really have a clear roadmap, but I was willing to look stupid, and I was willing to make the mistakes so that I could get my business off the ground. And luckily, in the process of making those mistakes, we didn't make a mistake that was fatal to the overall success of the business. So luckily that we got off the ground before anything crazy like that. But yeah, if I was starting off a business, the first thing you got to work on is your mental. And another thing with the mental is also the ability to take action, right? So like once you're like a part of the taking action is like clearing out that mental space to take action. I wasn't just talking about the things that I wanted to do. I was actually doing it. I was making the phone calls. I was getting out in front of the customers that I wanted to serve. And in the process of doing that, that brought opportunities in front of me. And then in the process of bringing those opportunities in front of me, you have to, execute on what's in front of you. And if you execute properly, then you can start to build long-term relationships and get repeat business from those customers.
I've got some follow-up thoughts to what you just said. Action is obviously huge, and you're talking about mindset. So I'm thinking about if you're thinking about starting a business, like obviously having an idea and taking it to the market with that action is extremely important. And regardless of how good you think you are, you're going to mess up, you're going to fail when you first come to the market, right? And it's having that mindset that you're talking about to overcome those obstacles and to be able to continue moving forward. You just take what you learn, fix what didn't work, and then try again and keep going. And the other thing I want to add is you were talking about when you were starting your business is that you had to borrow money from places, you had to, and it was challenging, right? And that's another thing to consider is when you're talking about starting a business, making sure that you have enough, what do we want to call it, dry powder as far as your cash reserves so that you can get it off the ground, because statistically it takes at least 3, if not 5 years to successfully start a business. And there's a good chance that during that startup period, you won't be receiving revenue, or at least not enough to cover your bills, right? So maybe you're doing it as a side hobby to start or something like that, but making sure you have enough cash at least accessible to you to make sure you can grow your business. And it sounds like you did, which is an awesome example there. And I want to ask you, what else would you say you felt like was holding you back when you were trying to start your business? We've talked about cash available. Were there other things that was a struggle for you that our audience might benefit from hearing?
Man, I was so scared, man. Honestly, I was like petrified. I was really, really scared to when I first started my business, scared of everything. Like I was telling you before, I was scared to get in front of people. Like you can't get sales if you're afraid to get in front of people. Like, so I remember like when I first was making those phone calls, like I would literally have to reset my mind and like I'd be shaking before I started making the calls. But after I'd start the momentum and build into those calls, like I was getting better. I was figuring out the things to say and the things not to say. So all of that like kind of played into like me getting a little bit of confidence. And then once I had that, started getting confident in what I was saying and what I was doing, then the being scared came, like it started to dissipate. And it's still there even to this day, now we're going after bigger opportunities. So there's still that little fear factor, like, oh man, are you good enough? Can you really do it? But as you continue to just take action and move things forward, it starts to dissipate. And then it's also like, it's chunking it down. So I didn't initially have the goal of having do $100 million a year. The goal initially was to do $10 million a year. And that was really overwhelming when we were at zero, right? Like that was like the big picture goal. That was like when I was 60, I was going to finally get to a $10 million a year company. And then I was like 26 or 7 or whatever. And we were there and I was like, oh my God, what do I do next? And honestly, I was the saddest point I was in my entire life, because it was like, you have this big goal and you get to it and you're like, what's next? Or like, what else, And my biggest problem in that moment was that I didn't reset the goal, right? So really what this thing is what I'm really saying here is my first target, if you're really starting out, you get to 100,000, because you can't be $1 million business if you've never done $100,000 a year. And then you can't be a $10 million business if you've never done $1 million a year. So the next target after 100,000 is to get to $1 million. And then once you get to $1 million, the next target after that, set it at 10 million. And when you're at 10 million, the next target after that is 100 million. So that's what we've said. But yeah, there's always going to be things that scare you along that way. But I think about the person that I've become to get to a point of doing $10 million a year. And then it's like to get to $100 million a year, like there's no possible way that I'm going to be able to do that by myself. So now I think about the team and like what the team has to become to get to $100 million a year. And that's what we're really doubling down on now is like the leaders in the organization, being able to bring those team members on, train them on like what McKinsey does, you know, because there's a lot of construction companies out there that do commercial, they do residential, they do, you know, a lot of things, but not everybody does government work. So I have to take those people and find people that have like really strong skill sets and then train them on the government process. And we've done that time and time again on the operations side, on the estimating side, on the finance side. And we've grown an awesome team that's really hungry, really ready to go, and also has the skill set, but also the humbleness to be willing to grow and to learn from different people. Because at the same time, I need to learn. I'm constantly taking in new information to learn so that we can all get this business to the next level together.
A lot of great points in there, and just trying to pull a couple out of what you said. Goal setting is obviously extremely important, and obviously setting a goal that's a stretch but still attainable for yourself. And then once you hit it, then resetting and going for a larger goal. You're also talking quite a bit about building your team, and I wanted to ask you specifically, do you have thoughts for our listeners about what you can do to be a good leader? Because obviously to run a successful team or company, you have to be a leader. And so that's my question. What can you do to be a good leader?
Yeah. So leadership is something that people always looked at me as a leader, but I never like internally like embodied being a leader. And it was something that definitely held me back now that I know like what real leadership looks like. I'm like, man, dude, that would be so much bigger, so much faster if I had this stuff like.
Don't beat yourself up. Don't beat yourself up.
I know. I'm not beating myself too bad. So one thing with leadership is like, it's not about you. Like I heard one of my mentors said, when you have a bunch of puppies, right? You have the big dog, like it's letting the puppies eat first. And then you think about yourself. Right. So that's really what leadership is. It's like, it's cultivating an environment for people to grow and make. So it's like me understanding what success looks like, but then making everybody else success easier so that they can basically compress 10 years into 1 year. And that's what we've done. I mean, like, for example, like we have an estimator that came on McKinsey, and she's been here for 2 years now. And, you know, she's done everything I've asked her to do. From a standpoint of like learning how to like find government opportunities, to responding to government opportunities. And like when I say respond, like you got to write all these narratives and like it's crazy, but she's totally absorbed all of this stuff and she knows how to execute on it now. And she also knows how to put together pricing, right? She understands how to go talk to subcontractors and get electrical pricing, mechanical pricing. And not just like, hey, I need to run like 10 feet of ductwork, but these are like 100-ton chillers and like air analine units and all this stuff. It's like taking what she had already done, because she grew up her dad was a contractor. She knew stuff about construction. She was a journeyman electrician. She had estimated for a company that was like more of a masonry company. But then she came into McKinsey, who was a general contractor, and she absorbed so much of the knowledge that I've learned over the last 10 years. And now she's farther ahead than me in 1 year because she's been able to absorb all that information. So to be a really good leader, it's not about you, and it's making everybody's success easier. And the easier that you can make your team members' success, the faster they can get results, and then the faster they can get results for the business, which then translates into results for themselves.